there is growing recognition of the relevance of socio-economic rights to ensuring pro-poor, inclusive and sustainable development. The Constitution of Zimbabwe guarantees socio-economic rights for all citizens. Chapter 4 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe provides a Declaration of Rights, commonly known as the Bill of Rights. The socio-economic rights incorporated in the Constitution include the right to freedom of profession, trade or occupation, labour rights, property rights, rights to agricultural land, right to education, right to healthcare, as well as rights to food and clean water. Governments have 3 obligations relating to socio-economic rights. First, they must respect people's rights by not undertaking actions that violate these rights. Second, they must protect people's rights by ensuring that other people or bodies do not violate such rights. Third, they must fulfill people's rights by taking actions to make them a reality in practice.
I think basically a government is there to enable people to realize happiness and to realize their full rights. But in this case, we are caught in a vicious cycle of poverty.
The country faces formidable challenges in resolving high levels of poverty owing to the decline in formal sector employment. The 2014 Labour Force and Child Labour Survey has shown that 94% of the currently employed persons of 15 years and above are informally employed. Poverty afflicts the majority of youths and women in rural areas and in the informal economy where they work with little or no incomes.
The poverty situation in Zimbabwe at the moment, the incidence is really high. And while previously we were talking of poverty in rural areas, now it's cutting across both rural and urban. As we see more and more deindustrialization happening, taking away people's paid jobs. And so we find that there is more poverty, and especially among women. The feminization of poverty is really on the increase.
Food insecurity continues to affect many communities. The country experienced a sharp increase in the Global Hunger Index, the GHI, scoring from 16.5 in 2014 to 30.8 in 2015, before declining to 28.8 in 2016. The right to education includes the right to free and compulsory primary education and increasing access to secondary, technical, vocational and higher education. Realizing people's rights to education reduces their vulnerability to child labour, early marriage, discrimination and many other human rights abuses. It also increases their opportunities to realize other human rights, including the right to health.
We are saying education as a socio-economic right is an enabling right for every Zimbabwean in the country. And because this is an enabling right, it is a right that has been elevated into a priority claim. And as a priority claim, it has become an authoritative entitlement for every Zimbabwean. And when we say it's authoritative entitlement for every Zimbabwean, we are saying that this right, therefore, must be provided by the state. And because the citizens of the state have an entitlement to it, which is underlined by the Constitution. I don't need to repeat that the objectives of the Constitution in Chapter 2, Sections 27 are clear about provision of education in the country and basic education which must be state-funded.
Section 27 of the Constitution obliges the state to take all practical measures to promote free and compulsory education for children. And Section 75 entitles every citizen and permanent resident of Zimbabwe to a basic state-funded education, including adult basic education and further education, which the state, through reasonable legislative and other measures, must make progressively available and accessible. This is in line with the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. The country made significant strides in the education sector during the first decade of independence. However, the introduction of market reforms under the Economic Structural Adjustment Program, ESAP, in the early 1990s and the ensuing crisis of the 1997 to 2008 period resulted in a reversal of most of the key gains registered in the 1980s. Education expenditure at a percentage of GDP declined from 1.8% in 1980 to 0.5% in 1996. With the adoption of cost recovery and a subsequent decline in government support for education, school enrollments began to decline, while school dropouts increased.
Yes.
Urikuenda kuchikoro here?
Handisi. Ndatozvenudoni mwedzi mingani.
Indawo usiri kuenda kuchikoro?
Mari yeschool fees zviri kunetsa.
Unogara nani?
Mama nadedi.
Vari kuenda kubasa here?
Havasi.
Saka munorarama sei?
Ndingatongotengesawo musika saka kuona isu tori madhiri mutwini wangu ari kumusha nofana wangu 3 mumwe wacho ndo yarabwa atoenda asadzingwa mumwe wacho ake ariko but anodzingwa kamwe kacho kachiri kadiki asati kakutoenda kuchikoro.
Saka chii chaungade kukurudzira kuhurumende kuti iite kuti mukwanise kudzoka pachikoro?
Kudada vatombomira kutodzingawo vana pamwe tingatiwo zvakanaka vakwanisa kudzidzawo.
While some progress has been made since 2009, challenges remain. These include inadequate financing for public education. This is despite the fact that the education sector consistently receives the highest share of resources within the national budget. In the 2017 national budget, the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education received the biggest share of 19.6% of the total budget, which translates into 6.4% of GDP. High pupil-to-teacher ratios, known as PTRs, also exist in public schools. Increasing dropout rates of pupils, particularly among girls, is another challenge. The Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education has attributed the high pupil dropout mainly to poverty, hunger, unplanned pregnancies, and child marriages. Inadequate school infrastructure, including inadequate science laboratories, libraries, electricity, computers, water, and sanitation, impede the right to education, among others. The right to health was first articulated in the 1946 Constitution of the World Health Organization, the WHO, whose preamble defines health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. The preamble further states that the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health is one of the fundamental rights of every human being, without distinction of race, religion, political belief, economic, or social condition. The right to health is provided for under Section 76 of the Zimbabwean Constitution, which clearly spells out the right of every citizen and permanent resident of Zimbabwe to have access to basic healthcare services, including reproductive health. In the years following independence in 1980, Zimbabwe made impressive progress in healthcare. The primary healthcare policy of the 1980s ensured the decentralization of health facilities and accessibility of healthcare to the majority of Zimbabweans, including women. Life expectancy rose from 55 years in 1980 to 60 years in 1989. Immunization coverage was increased to more than 80%. However, the introduction of ESAP and the economic crisis of 1997 to 2008 resulted in a significant reduction in the amount of resources available for investment in the health sector. For instance, per capita allocation to health declined from a peak of US dollars 2360 in 1990 to US dollars 14 by the end of 2001. The deteriorating economy has created severe health risks for women in particular. The brain drain which the country has faced has resulted in a shortage of trained nurses, doctors, and technicians in government hospitals. And it has become very difficult to obtain drugs and equipment because of cutbacks in government expenditure. Many households are forced to resort to alternative or traditional health delivery systems or other coping strategies. The high cost of drugs and medical services, coupled with a lack of foreign currency, has resulted in more families not being able to access such services.
I can say, the health delivery system in Zimbabwe has been on a decline in the last 2 decades. This is as a result of a number of factors. And you remember the economic structural adjustment program of the late 1990s, the advent of HIV/AIDS, the impact of the brain drain, and of course the issue of corruption, which started to rear its ugly head also in the late 90s. So as a result of all these factors, you would realize that most of the gains that the country had achieved in the first 10 years of independence have now been eroded. You also look at the human resources factor. We are one country that used to produce some of the best, human resource cadres within the region. And as a result of the poor working conditions and the push factors, we have lost some of our most experienced, health workers to the region and also to other countries like the UK, Australia, and so forth. And then you look at the infrastructure itself. Over the years, we have seen the deterioration of the infrastructure mainly due to poor funding. In terms of our health financing, it is very sad that in the past, health used to come second after education, but we have seen it being relegated to number 3, number 5. So in terms of health financing, we have not done very well, even meeting some regional commitments such as Abuja. So as a result, we have not done enough in terms of taking care of our infrastructure, even equipment in our hospitals.
In the 2017 national budget, health received 6.9% of the total vote, which translates to 2% of GDP. Employment costs, however, constitute 79% of the total health budget. Government will spend an average of $21 per person on healthcare in 2017, which is grossly inadequate. This per capita allocation is much lower when you remove the employment cost component. Comparatively, the per capita health allocation is lower than the SADC average of $146. Per capita health allocation is $650 in South Africa. It is $90 in Zambia, and it is $200 in Angola. Zimbabwe's 2% budget allocation remains lower than the sub-Saharan African average of 11.3%, or the 15% target set in Abuja.
Kuzvipatara akusi kunyatsorapwa munhu nemazvo nekuda kwokuti anorapwa nemazvo hunge aine mari. Asina mari hakuna mapiritsi, unongonyorerwa unzi enda unotenga. Saka pakunotenga ipapo varombo ndo vakawanda. Saka munhu achashayikira ari mumba nekuti zvino ndikaendako ndinonobatsirwa sei ndisina mari. Saka idambudziko kune vakadzikira.
Closing gaps in coverage and outcomes by eliminating the huge income gap between urban and rural communities enables the differentials in key health indicators to be addressed. Water and sanitation are crucial not only for health, but also for other key aspects of development, such as gender equality, education, and economic growth. Section 77 of the Constitution gives every person the right to safe, clean, and portable water. Sustainable Development Goal number 6 of the UN seeks to ensure the availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation. An important target under this goal is to achieve universal and equitable access to safe and affordable drinking water for all by 2030. Another important target under this goal is to achieve access to adequate and equitable sanitation and hygiene for all, and end open defecation, paying special attention to the needs of women and girls and those in vulnerable situations. Results from the 2015 Zimbabwe Demography and Health Survey show that 78.1% of households have access to improved sources of drinking water. These figures, however, hide a wide disparity in access to safe drinking water between urban areas at 97.2% and rural areas at 68.5%. Some parts of Harare have, in some instances, not had water supplies for as long as 5 years. 37% of Zimbabwean households use improved toilet facilities, which are defined as non-shared facilities that prevent people from coming into contact with human waste and reduce the risk of transmitting cholera, typhoid, and other diseases. 23% of households do not use any toilet facility. The availability of proper sanitation facilities is much higher in urban areas than it is in rural areas. Rural households are more likely to have an unimproved toilet facility or have no toilet at all when compared with urban households, 48% and 5% respectively. The country has also experienced sporadic outbreaks of waterborne diseases owing to poor waste management. Most local authorities are struggling to manage waste owing to financial constraints, inadequate and malfunctioning equipment, inefficient collection practices, inadequate environmental control systems, open burning of garbage, indiscriminate illegal dumping, and littering. The current water and sanitation situation in Zimbabwe is the result of the lack of investment in these sectors during and after the economic crisis of the last decade.
The situation on water in Harare obviously remains precarious. And the major reason is that the city of Harare does not have the capacity to supply enough potable water for the city. I mean, for example, Moton Jeffrey Waterworks, which is the main waterworks in the city, produces roughly between 470 megaliters of water to 495 per day, against a daily demand of 1,200 megaliters of water. So you can see that already less than half the requirement is produced. Now, if you add 55% of lost water due to pipe leakages, so we are getting roughly 250 megaliters of water per day. So that tells you the situation in the city, and it cannot be resolved unless the city increases its generation capacity. So we will continue to have these problems of water. I mean, areas like Mavuku, they are Tafaram, Budiriro, Greendale, Borodale, Masasa. They get water once a week. Sometimes in other areas, they have gotten water for over 17 years, primarily because of gradient issues there in Mavuku. They are far away from the city. So we will always have water problems.
Mvura iri kunetsa kuno chizhanji chibhorani chacho chinombofa mvura inobuda kamwe chete pasvondo saka tiri kunetseka chaizvo nenyaya yemvura. Ndogara nevana 5 nababa neni 7. Tisi tooda kumbira kuti kuHarare City Council kubva zvatakasaudza makansela hatina kana chimwe chete chatamboona chavaita chipenyu. Saka tiri kumbira kuti gadzirirewo kunyanya nyaya yemvura nekuti hapana kurarama kwaonoita kana usina mvura. Nemarodzi edu, masiweji, zvinhu zvigadziriswe zvinake. Ndozvatiri kukumbirawo kuvakuru veCity Council nevakuru vemuno munharaunda yechizhanji.
In 2015, we counted 1,987 dumping sites within the city of Harare. Many of those dumping sites have significantly reduced. We do still see problematic areas, mainly around Bare and some of the high-density suburbs, where the litter is not as collected, the solid waste is not as collected as we would expect. But I think that the situation has improved. The problem is with liquid waste, because we do not have also sufficient capacity to treat all the liquid waste that we have. So Yoshitungwiza drops the liquid waste into Chivero. The city of Harare also drops liquid waste into Chivero. That's why you see Hysen in our water bodies.
Legislation and policies on water, sanitation, and hygiene exist, but they are not fully implemented. There is also a lack of monitoring and evaluation, which has an impact on the overall quality of water and sanitation. Shelter is essential for normal, healthy living, as it fulfills deep-seated psychological needs for privacy and personal space, physical needs for security and protection from severe weather patterns, and social needs for basic gathering points where important relationships are established and nurtured. Section 28 of the Constitution, which focuses on shelter, provides that the state and all institutions and agencies of government at every level must take reasonable legislative and other measures within the limits of the resources available to them to enable every person to have access to adequate shelter. In addition, Section 71.2 guarantees the right of every person to acquire, hold, occupy, use, transfer, hypothecate, lease, or dispose of all forms of property, either individually or in association with others in any part of Zimbabwe. Section 74 guarantees freedom from arbitrary eviction. A key milestone under Sustainable Development Goal 11 is to ensure access for all to adequate, safe, and affordable housing and basic services, and upgrade slums by 2030. The increase in the urban population, coupled with rising informality, has led to a number of challenges that include rising incidence of urban poverty, inadequate housing, inadequate provision of services, and environmental degradation and pollution. Owing to the high demand for housing that is not matched by sufficient supply, a number of informal settlements have emerged on the fringes of many urban centres. These informal settlements have added pressure on on-site and off-site infrastructure.
The urban housing situation is also quite precarious. And the reason is simple, that our population has significantly increased. And that has not been met with a corresponding policy or a corresponding program by the city to address the situation. So you have new illegal settlements that have come up. You have your Caledonia, there are over 120,000 people. It's as big as Bindura. So we need actually 3 MPs to cover Bindura. You have areas like Harare South, all these areas that are coming up. It's a sign that we have a crisis in terms of urban housing, and it emanates from our failure to manage urban land.
According to Homeless International, about 835,000 people live in informal settlements. Often, these households do not have adequate access to water, electricity, and land rights. There has also been a reported increase in HIV and sexually transmitted infections, STIs, in a number of these informal settlements.
Saka ndakazopiwa mumwe mwana mumabhawa vana vangu ndibva vaita vaviri saka so ndiri kungorarama nechipambi ichocho ndichigara nawo muno muAirport. Saka pamba pandogara chikafu ndichocho zvokungotamburirawo ndinongoitawo zvokutamburira zvokungoti vana vangu vararame.
Muno muAirport ndane 6 months ndichigara munomu kubva ndabvawo kumusha, asi 6 months idzi ndakambenge ndichigara ku-Snake Park ndikazoenda kumusha zvekare nenyaya yekuti basa ranga rapera. Ndaimbosenza paHolice Hotel, saka basa rakazoperawo chinzi mari haichawanika yekuti tibhadharwe. Saka vandazoenda kumusha vandazodzoka vandatanga kugara kuno kuAirport. Saka kuAirport kunoku mabasa ari kushayika, asi nemari shoma yanga ndinayo ndakatanga kuita zvemusika wandiri kuita panapa. Pamusika pamachallenges andofesa nayo ndeyekuti sika kunoku zvinhu zvekunoku zvakachipa nenyaya yemararamirwo anoitwa kunoku. Nzvimbo inogara mwana nemari dzakadzikira dzedziri. Saka kungowana kurarama nekubhadhara rent. Asi nyaya yekuti uzowana zvimwe zvinobudira zvekuenda kumberi, sepanapa ini ndakatanga zvinhu ndichida kuti ndikwanise kuti nditore license ndikwanise kuwanawo chitupa chekuwanisawo basa rekuti ndishandewo. Asi mari dzacho hadzikwanise kumultiply nenyaya yekuti rent ndeichida kubhadhara, chikafu ndeichida kudya, mwana wechikoro anenge achida kuenda kuchikoro. Saka zvikuramba kutobhalansa zvokungoti ndongoramba ndangostika pa1 position. Dai yanga ichigona kutibatsirawo government yaitibatsirawo nemabasa ekuita, asi sezvo mabasa achari kunetsa zvawo kudai, kana yakapota ichitiwedzerawo pane zvetinge tinazvo zvemusika yedu yokurawo, zvinogona kuti tikwanise kurarama.
Resources, in particular labor, are moving from high productivity sectors, in particular manufacturing, towards the informal economy, to the extent that 94.5% of all jobs, according to the 2014 Labor Force Survey, are actually informal, up from 80% in 2004. That basically suggests that the economy is now in an informal mode, which is not a building plank for sustainable development. The way forward basically involves social dialogue, given the trade-offs in policy. If you want to address, for example, the challenge of runaway government expenditures, in particular rationalizing the employment costs, that may imply reducing certain costs. And that may not be acceptable to certain groups. So as such, what is important is for government to sit down with other key stakeholders to map out the way forward. That's why social dialogue, and in particular negotiating a social contract, is the way forward. In essence, this is what defines a democratic developmental state. It is consultative, it leverages social cohesion, not only within government, but also beyond government with other stakeholders.
The promotion of social and economic rights will ensure that this situation is turned around from the current situation of desperateness to a situation of hope, prosperity, and peace for all.